Hey guys, Victor here, coming at you with another deck profile, and for today's video we're going to be doing another updated Tearlament deck. Now this Tearlament version is going to be the more budget-oriented version compared to the one that I showcased previously, which is the one that had the, the Fiendsmith stuff, the Horus engine, things of that nature. And instead we're going to be basically cutting the amount by a pretty significant margin, as we're not going to be including any of those cards. Now, just because this is the more budget-friendly does not mean that it's a cheap deck. If you want to play Tearlament and have some kind of success with it, you got to shell out a little bit of cash. So, just be aware of that. I don't want to hear any crying in the comments when you see a card that's worth more than $10, all right? If you want to play a deck for like under 40 bucks, go play Pokemon. They're literally right over there. Everything's super affordable. If you want to play Yu-Gi-Oh though, that's just not going to be the case, right? You have to shell out some if you want your deck to be somewhat competent. So with that in mind, let's just jump straight into it. As always, we're going to be starting off with the monster lineup first, and we're of course going to be playing 3 Tearlaments Reinoheart. It's quite literally the heart and soul of the deck, as it opens up so many different avenues for play. If you want to mill, you send Tear Cash. If you want to fusion summon, you send any of your other guys. It opens up your Exceed plays, your Link plays. It's just like a good general body to always have access to. So as a result, you got to play 3 of it. Then to accompany our 3 Tearlaments Reinoheart, we're going to be playing 3 Tearlaments Kashtira. On special or normal, it's able to mill 3 cards, and then it's going to mill 2 more cards when it's sent to the grave by card effect. And then to go with those, we're playing the 1 of Tier monsters, being the 1 of Merrli, the 1 of Havnis, and the 1 of Scheiren. Like I always say, you pretty much have to max out on every single one. Some people play 2 Reinoheart, but unless you're combining this with like another engine that actually needs a space, I don't feel like that's the smartest thing to do, just because, like I said, it does open up so many different avenues, even without cards like Kiklos, for example. It really is just that integral to the strategy. And that's it for the tier monsters. And then for the rest of the deck, we're still going to be playing 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. You have to stop the Mole Charmies, even if this is a more budget-friendly option. Or I guess I should say, even especially because this is a more budget-friendly option, you don't have the choice of including cards like Crossout Designator with your own Mole Charmies, just because they cost a lot, right? And so that's basically just not in mind. But Ash Blossom still gets the job done. If they have a second one, good luck. But it'll be able to stop the first one for sure. Then for the other 3 of monster, that's not a tier card, we're playing 3 King of the Swamp. Yes, Return of the King. You discard it, you add Polymerization, but that effect honestly doesn't really matter all that much. The card really shines in the fact that once it hits the grave, you can basically use it to summon a good amount of your fusions, right? Like, it opens up access to cards like Rukalos, which without Kiklos we normally wouldn't have access to. However, normally you would be seeing me play like the level 4 Beast King of the Swamp, as you can normal summon that and then overlay into Bahamut Shark. But when you're not taking advantage of like all the cards available to you, or you just don't have the choice, King of the Swamp is a perfectly fine substitute. And like, even though you can't like exceed with it, it's perfectly fine, right? Adding the Polymerization does allow you to play other cards like Guardian Chimera, or just like hard fuse for all your fusion summons, which does come up somewhat whenever this card is seeing play. And it's a perfectly fine substitute if you don't want to play the Beast King of the Swamp. Then for the first controversial part of my budget deck, we're playing 2 Kashtira Fenrir. Now, while Kashtira Fenrir honestly isn't required to play a deck, it does help out tremendously, as it's a body that summons itself, that searches out Tearlaments Kashtira, and it always threatens your opponent's forward whenever they decide to activate a monster effect. So I feel like you should be including it in most situations. And you don't have to string for the ultimate, the secret rare is like around 15 bucks. So there are cheaper methods available to you. Or if you just want, you could do some weird stuff too and play like Nightmare Unicorn with like Kashtira Theosis to bring out your tier caches from deck. It's a little bit more gimmicky, and I honestly wouldn't recommend it, but the choice is there for you. It just, Fenrir is so simple, right? You just summon it, search tier cache, and then you have a body that threatens your opponent pretty much instantly. Next, we're going to be playing 2 Bystial monsters, 1 Bystial magnamhut and 1 Bystial Druiswurm. The Druiswurm honestly doesn't matter, and there are a lot of situations where I would actually find myself wanting to summon something like Baldrake instead, but the send for Druiswurm does elevate it more, and there's a reason it's the most expensive of all the main deck Bystial monsters, even more than Lubellion, I believe, even though that's a 3 of. I could be wrong. Those 2 are constantly like flipping back and forth between who's the more expensive one. But the Fiendsmith engine is quite literally everywhere, so just having like a Bystial to be able to get rid of those, have a body on the field, link off with it, or do other stuff with it. You can even like fusion summon with them, right? So they're not terrible mills, as they are dark monsters, which means that you can bring out like Mudragon of the Swamp, for example. And they do have their uses. So yeah, 2 Bystials. But like I said, if you don't want to play the Druiswurm, Baldrake is perfectly acceptable as well. But you for sure have to play the magnamhut. Then we're going to be playing the 1 Mudora, the Sword Oracle, just because you need at least 1 shuffler, like I always say. And for the final monster, we're actually going to be playing 1 Helshaddoll Hollow. So typically you'd be seeing people play something like Shaddoll Beast just to be able to draw a card, but I've always valued Hollow way more just because it's a potential to mill anywhere between like 1 to even like 5 cards, right? As it mills for every single different attribute you control. And like at a minimum, you're obviously going to have 1, especially if you go like activate Scheiren, discard Helshaddoll, summon itself, mill 3, and then you get to mill 1 more card. But the potential that you can get off the Helshaddoll is just invaluable, and it's one of the main reasons why I prefer it over Beast. Like, sure, drawing a card is cool, but potentially milling 5 cards, that's way cooler. And with that, that's the monster lineup, and now we can finally move on to the spell and trap portion. Now for the spells, we're of course going to be starting off with the best card in the deck being 3 Primeval Planet Perlereino. It still does everything that it used to do, being searches tears, pops cards, boosts your tears and fusions. Yeah, you got to play 3 of it. Then we're also playing 3 Tearlaments Scream. It's a phenomenal card when you pair it with like your Tear Kashtira or your Reinoheart, as it's basically going to allow you to mill 3 cards during your turn and your opponent's turn. It lowers all their monsters attacked by 500 for the rest of the turn. It searches out your Tear traps if you decide to play any. This card is just a great boost to the consistency, but that's it for the 3 ofs. And then for the 2 ofs, we're still going to be playing 2 Triple Tactics Talent. Hand traps are still everywhere, and even though Tearlament is one of those decks that can honestly push through your opponent having multiple hand traps, it's still nice to have just like that little extra bonus that Talents provides you, whether you're stealing a monster, drawing 2 cards, or ripping your opponent's hand apart and making them weaker. This card is just phenomenal. And then that's it for the 2 ofs, and then we play like a million 1 ofs. So we're playing the 1 Pressure Planet wraithsoth to search out our Fenrirs, and potentially our Tearlaments Kashtiras if we already have the Fenrirs. Our 1 Foolish Burial to send any monster, Foolish Burial Goods to send any spell or trap, our Tearlaments Grief to special summon any tier monster from our deck or graveyard, and then we have to send something. So it's like an emergency teleport plus a Foolish Burial combined into 1, and then when it's sent to the grave, it searches, or it lets you add back a banished trap. We have our 1 Reinforcement of the Army, which is basically a 4th copy of Tearlaments Reinoheart, as it just searches a warrior, and Reinoheart happens to be a warrior. We're playing 1 Reasoning, so it's kind of like all the previous aforementioned cards combined into 1. As your opponent calls a level, if they call it right, you so the way that Reasoning works, right, is you activate it, your opponent calls a level, and then you mill cards until you hit a monster that can be normal summoned, and if they call it right, it goes to grave. If they call it wrong, it gets special summoned. So you play a bunch of different levels in this deck, right? You play 3s, 4s, 2s, 7s, whatever Helshaddoll is, but I don't think that one can be normal summoned, so just ignore that one. But for the most part, right, you play a lot of different levels, so your opponent's gonna have a very difficult time. And even if they call it right, there's a lot of situations where they don't even want it to go to the grave, right? Say for example, they call 4, they hit Tearlaments Scheiren. Cool, you hit a Scheiren in the grave, and now you can fusion summon. But yeah, this play is this card is just really funny in the applications that it has. And then that's not even just like mentioning that it's also able to mill like your spells and traps, right? So you can hit your Sullieks, your Screams, your Griefs, whatever. So yeah, I really like this card in this deck, especially on the more budget-friendly versions, just because I feel like it helps a lot. And it's just a really cool card to resolve. Then we're also playing the 1 Polymerization to go with our 3 King of the Swamps, and the 1 Called by the Grave to stop some hand trap, ideally Dimension Shifter, but you're probably not going to draw it. And that's it for the spells. And then for the traps, we're playing the 2 Sulliek and the 1 Trivikarma. Same old. We never pretty much change that. It's always going to be 2 Sulliek, 1 Trivikarma, Meta Noise, and Crammer in the side deck. And with that, that's the main deck. 40 cards like always, and now we can finally move on to the extra deck. Now, unlike the other extra deck for the previous Tearlament deck profile, this one's actually super flexible with the choices that you can make, since you basically don't have to commit 4 to 5 slots just to fit in the Fiendsmith engine. So as a result, you have some pretty interesting tech choices that you can make. And with that in mind, we're going to start with the Exceed monsters. So we're playing the 1 Toadally Awesome. Now, this is a no-brainer. You have to include this in every tier deck. It really is that good. And you summon that out by making the Bahamut Shark. And like I said last time, it's pretty easy to make, just bring out Reinoheart, fusion summon into something like a Mudragon, or get another Reinoheart out somehow, whatever. Even with the lack of Beast King of the Swamp in the main deck, it's still incredibly easy to get access to this. So yeah, Bahamut, Toad, staples. We are going to be including the one Time Thief Redoer, just because I really enjoy the flexibility that it offers you, as you're able to take cards from your opponent's deck, and then depending on what you hit, it gets another additional effect, right? If it's a monster, it can banish itself until the end of the turn. If it's a spell, you get to draw a card, and if it's a trap, you get to bounce one face-up card your opponent controls to the top of the deck. So this card just provides so much value the moment it hits the field, and that's not even to mention that if your hand is like one of those little somewhat awkward hands, where you really need to like fusion summon, right? If you have like a Scheiren or a Reinoheart under this card detaches for effect, so it will trigger those cards. So it's basically like another way to try and get like a guaranteed fusion off. So yeah, one Time Thief Redoer, really solid. And then that's it for the Exceed monsters. For this specific version, for the links, we're going to be starting off with the weird one being one Barricadeborg blocker. So I actually really love this card in this deck just because it does a couple of things. So first off, on summon, it discards a card, which means that you can get rid of cards like Trivikarma or like your shufflers in your hand that you don't want there anymore. And then during the end phase, after this effect resolves, you're able to add any continuous spell or field spell from your grave to your hand. So not only does it get rid of bricks, but then it also allows you to replenish your hand by adding cards like Tearlaments Scream, Primeval Planet Perlereino, and Pressure Planet wraithsoth, all of which are super impactful cards that if your opponent fails to like finish you off on the follow-up turn, will definitely allow you to basically just win the game right then and there because of the value that it generates. Then, as if that wasn't already good enough, being able to discard and then add something during the end phase, all your face-up continuous spells and field spells cannot be destroyed by card effects. So that in turn means that cards like Duster, Lightning Storm, things like that are a lot less effective because they're not going to be able to get rid of your planets or your screams as easily. So, this is just like a really cool card that I enjoy showcasing in tournament whenever I get the chance. Next, we're playing the IP Masquerena, which, as always, is going to go into the SP Little Knight. However, because we have the flexibility and the option to, we're also going to be playing the Spright Sprind this time. And Spright Sprind, when it's link summoned, is able to foolish any level 2 monster from your deck to the grave. So it's pretty much just going to send Merrli. But it does have like another additional effect, right? Where if you have like an Exceed on the field, you can detach one of those materials and then like bounce one of your opponent's monsters. So if the situation comes up, which sometimes it does, sometimes making the Spright Sprind is better than making the SP Little Knight in certain situations, as the sending off the Merrli can in turn give you like a fusion summon, which can bring out like Kaleidoheart, Rukulos, Predaplant Dragos Depelia, and those cards paired with the field spell means that you're going to pop a card, potentially negate a card, or like spin a card or whatever. So things do get pretty out of hand the moment this card comes out. And there's also some other really cool plays too, right? Where you can go like Bahamut Shark into Toad. And then if your hand is like pretty weak or whatever, you link both of those off into the Spright Sprind, and then boom, you basically have like an instant Kaleidoheart because you're going to have the Toad in the grave. You should have a Reinoheart in the grave at some point because you made the Bahamut Shark. And then you're also going to be sending the Merrli. So that will give you the Kaleidoheart, and then like your Toad's graveyard effect will activate too to potentially add like a Tear Cache to your hand or something. So, there's a lot of really cute plays that just add up pretty well, like when like you're actually able to see the deck in motion. So yeah, one Spright Sprind, pretty solid. Now that's it for the links, and then we play a lot of fusion monsters. So because we play the Helshaddoll, we're going to be playing the one Helshaddoll Winda. I honestly don't really enjoy playing cards like this, but you might as well take advantage of it while you can, right? Because you never know, maybe Winda will get banned one day. Probably not, but it should. And this is basically like a pseudo floodgate, as no player can special summon more than once per turn. One of the really cool things that Winda does provide you, though, is that it's also a protection from Nibiru, as Nibiru attempts to summon itself and a token. So because of that, they're not able to activate it under Winda. That's like the only cool interaction I can think of about Winda. But overall, it's a good card. A little ignorant at times, but it's solid. And then we're playing the one Guardian Chimera as well. This is typically going to be what you're going to summon with like your Polymerization, right? And depending on like how many materials and where they're from, it gets to destroy and draw cards equal to a certain amount. But one of the really cool things about this is that when you fusion summon for a Guardian Chimera, there's a lot of situations where you're going to be summoning it with like a tier monster, right? Whether it's like a Scheiren, Havnis, or Merrli. So you can do some really cute things where like you go like Guardian Chimera, Chainlink 1, Chainlink 2, your fusion summon. And if your opponent has like, I don't know, a skill drain face up on the field, I know, not very likely to happen with skill drain being limited and all, but it did used to come up. You'd fusion summon away the Guardian Chimera, and then because it's not on field anymore, it's effectively able to resolve, and you get to draw and pop or whatever. So this card, it's really cool. The resources that it generates is just invaluable. It destroys opponents' cards on the field. If you're playing King of the Swamp with Polymerization, you have to include the Guardian Chimera. And then with that, we're going to move on to the Super Poly targets, even though we don't play Super Poly, being the Mudragon of the Swamp, Garura Wings of Resonant Life, and the Predaplant Dragostapelia. All really good cards that can be summoned fairly easily in this deck, even without Super Poly, so, got to include them. Then, for the other fusions, we're going to be playing one Grapha Dragon Overlord of Dark World, as it's basically like another pseudo-negate. If your opponent decides to activate a normal spell, normal trap, or a monster effect, you can make them discard a card in your hand instead. And there are certain times where that just can steal the game right then and there, right? Like, say you've lowered your hand size to 1 and you just kept like a Sulliek in your hand, right? Your opponent activates something, you go Grapha, send Sulliek triggers to add a tier monster, usually Tearlaments Kashtira, and then you just go to town on your opponent. But it's fine. It's just basically like another way that we can take advantage of our King of the Swamps. And then we're also playing the one Rucolos to also take advantage of our King of the Swamps to negate special summons. And then lastly, we're playing the one Kaleidoheart, as it's quite literally the boss monster of the deck. It spins on summon, it foolishes when it's sent to the graveyard by card effect. This card, it's just phenomenal. And with that, that's the Tearlament deck. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. See ya!